As a project manager, the single biggest point of failure isn't your timeline, your budget, or your team. It's probably your vendors. One bad vendor can sink a perfect project and blow up your budget. In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to give you everything you need to know, a concise, easy to follow playbook for vendor management without the fluff. Welcome to the channel. My name is Dr. Wing Lam, and I'm here to help you lead projects with clarity and confidence. Let's dive in. Now, there are 4 steps in this vendor playbook. Let's start with step 1, which is your requirements. Your goal here is to establish what your requirements are before you start approaching vendors. Sounds simple, right? In reality, it's much harder than you think. This crucial first step will help save you a lot of time, money, and wasted effort. I'm going to go through this quickly, so feel free to pause the video if you need to, and take a screenshot if you want to save the information on the slides for reference. Now, you want to think about your essential needs and requirements, the problem you're trying to solve, the outcome you're seeking. Try and distinguish your needs from your wants. Needs are things you can't do without, whereas wants are optional features. Importantly, you need to identify the constraints you're working within, including time, budget, and other resources. It's important to capture everything in a single document. I refer to this as the scope of work document. Make sure you share the document internally so that others can review it in case you've missed anything. Step 2 is vendor selection. You want to make sure you or your team select vendors using a structured process. Again, this will save you time and effort, but it also ensures you're able to justify and explain your decision-making in a transparent way. In some cases, this step can be done in a day. However, for more complex projects, vendor selection can take months. Now, it isn't always the case that the big, well-known firms are the best vendors. Here's a case in point. In 2019, car rental giant Hertz filed a $32 million lawsuit against Accenture for a failed project to redevelop their website as part of their digital transformation initiative. Hertz claimed that, amongst other things, the website didn't have the required features, was not responsive, and had security issues. So don't assume the big firms know what they're doing. Look beyond the sales pitch. Put in the time and effort to select the right vendor. Here's what you should do. Based on your requirements and scope of work document from step 1, research the market to identify prospective vendors. If it's a large project where significant sums of money are involved, you can ask vendors to submit a proposal based on your scope of work document. This is known as an RFP. Identify the criteria that you'll be using to select vendors. This might include, for example, their project experience, industry knowledge, pricing and product features. Create a scorecard like the one shown here based on your vendor selection criteria. Don't make the list of criteria too long and unwieldy. I recommend between 6 to 12 criteria depending on the scope of work. If one criteria is deemed to be more important than another, you can include a weighting. How you assign scores is up to you, but I like using percentages. Now, many organizations fall into the trap where they select vendors based on price. Be aware that the lowest price doesn't necessarily equate to the best deal. Your primary objective is to ensure that the vendor has the capabilities to do the job and that the job is done to a high standard. That's why using a broad range of selection criteria is better than focusing on price. Aim to shortlist and rank 3 to 5 vendors. If needed, you can include demos and trials as part of a more in-depth ranking process. Now, the way I like to organize the ranking process is to have individual team members rank vendors first. This prevents group bias and helps highlight any differences in opinion that warrant further discussion. Remember that it's not just about adding up the numbers in your scorecard and seeing which vendor has the highest score. Discuss the rankings with your team to validate all of your findings and make any adjustments accordingly after further review. At this point, identify your preferred vendor before moving to the next step. Now, it's worth keeping in mind your second and possibly third choice vendor. For example, you might approach them again if another opportunity arises in the future, or if things don't work out with your preferred vendor for whatever reason. It's also an important part of developing your market intelligence and knowing who some of the key players are. So we're now at step 3 in the vendor playbook, which is the contractual agreement. Now, this step can be quite quick If the scope of work is simple and well defined, the vendor will usually have a standardized contract that you can review. On the other hand, if the scope of work is a lot more complicated, this might require a custom agreement to be hammered out that involves significant legal work. Now, if that is the case, there are some things you need to look out for. First off, you need to be clear and explicit in the contractual agreement. Be as specific as you can in the statement of work and avoid any vagueness where there's room for misinterpretation. Be clear on how the vendor will be paid. Will they be paid based on the deliverables they produce or the time their team is spending on the project? Also, establish reasonable criteria for accepting a vendor's work. What this means is, even though a vendor produces a deliverable, you have the opportunity to review the quality of the work before you accept it. If there's someone from the vendor's team who impressed you and you'd like them to be a part of the vendor's team for the project, you can negotiate that as part of the contractual agreement. If there's a possibility that the scope of work may change or expand during the project, include a change control process as part of the agreement, which describes how new work is approved. That way you won't get billed for work you didn't agree to. And don't forget to specify what happens at the end of the contract. You want the vendor to provide all the documentation and assets they produced as part of the project, and to delete any confidential data. Remember that this step also depends on how well you can negotiate with a vendor, and don't make the mistake of trying to get a big discount on the price. Instead, think about value for money and getting the vendor to include more as part of the deal. That's usually a lot more palatable from the vendor's perspective. Step 4 is the vendor relationship. This is the final step in the playbook, and it's about working collaboratively with the vendor to ensure a win-win outcome. Remember, when you start work with a new vendor, there will be a period of onboarding. So help the vendor get up to speed as quickly as possible. Prepare all the information they might need ahead of time. Reconfirm with them the statement of work, including deliverables, timelines, and any KPIs. That will help set the right expectations. And when work starts, track that performance in a very clear and transparent way. Have regular check-ins with your vendors to review progress and understand any issues they might be facing. And remember, try and resolve any issues collaboratively. It's not about you versus them, but about working together to get the job done. So there you have it, a complete playbook on vendor management. Let's quickly review the 4 steps. Step 1, your requirements. Step 2, vendor selection. Step 3, contractual agreement. And step 4, the vendor relationship. Remember, don't take what your vendor says on face value. It's your responsibility to select the best vendor for the job. Ask the right questions so that you get the information you need in order to make the decisions that is best for you and your organization. Now, did I miss anything? If so, please add them to the comments below. And here are some other videos on vendor management that you might find useful.